guys, welcome back to Q&A with Chef A. And what we've been talking about with these podcasts are, ovens and heat. Last podcast, we just talked about heat. What is it? It's energy. How does it move? Upward and towards anything cool. Why would we talk about that for 15 minutes? Because if we're going to really understand our ovens, the first thing we have to understand is what heat is. So go back and take a look at that podcast if you haven't yet and you're curious about that. Now that we understand a little bit about how heat travels, the energy that is heat, what it's looking to do, which is to get everything else around it its same temperature, I want to talk a little bit about understanding our own ovens and giving our ovens a little bit of love. Here's the thing. The more we know about that oven, the better our home cooking will be. That's it. I mean, that's the reason behind paying some attention to what's happening there. I think there's so many tools in our life. I mean, at least for me, being present is not my forte. I work on it. So therefore, we take a lot of things for granted. We never really think a lot about how the tools that we're using work or function. And boy, do I believe that our oven is one of those tools we take for granted. We turn on a switch, boop, it's on, and then we turn a dial, crank, 350, and then we wait for a light to pop on, and we believe that that light is telling us that this oven is now 350 degrees. And that's conceivably what's happening there. But I will say that it is worth getting to know your oven a little bit more intimately than flip, crank, and wait for a light. So we understand how the heat's working in our oven, and now, based on that video, you take a look at your oven. Is your heat source, is the element on the top or is it on the bottom? One thing I'll say about elements that are on the top, the preheat should conceivably, scientifically, take longer because you're working against heat's natural desire to move upward, and so there's nowhere to go. Eventually it sort of traps up and it'll force itself down into the cooler spaces, as we discussed in the last video. So that's going to take longer than if I just turn on a heat element at the bottom of a box. It's naturally going to start drifting upward. I mean, from the minute it's got a degree of heat on it, it's going to start drifting upwards. So the preheat on an oven with a heat element in the bottom should be shorter. I don't think you need to change your oven. It doesn't matter to me where the heat element is. It matters that you know where that heat element is and give yourself an idea about time frame on it. If you always preheated your oven for 5 minutes at your old house and at your new house, you've had some weird cooking experiences, check that oven out. Is the coil in a different place? Aha, the preheat might be a little bit longer. Some things that you can consider for getting to know your oven a little bit better. One of the cheapest, easiest things you can do is buy an oven thermometer. They just hang in your oven, and they're maybe $4 or $5 at a kitchenware store, or of course Amazon, something like that. And get an oven thermometer and hang it in the very center of that box. Remember, I drew this really good 3D box in our last one. Hang it dead center, like right in here. So you're getting a read of what the full box's temperature really is right at dead center. What I would do is put my thermometer in, turn my oven on 350, and hang out. The minute my little light pops on, boop, I'm preheated. I'm going to open the door and take a look at the thermometer. Does the thermometer agree with me that this oven is now a full 350 degrees? If the answer is no, close the oven door and start tracking the time. Check it again in 5 minutes. Is it at 350? Okay. That tells me that my preheat setting might be off calibration a bit, and rather than trusting a little red light, I'm going to make a note for myself that for a 350 degree preheated oven, I need blank minutes, right? Make that note for yourselves, put it on a sticky next to the range. Eventually, you'll memorize it. I don't think you need a new oven if your preheat light comes on sooner than an oven thermometer agrees that the whole box is at temperature. What I think is that you just need to be a smarter user of your oven, right? I want to mention briefly things that can really take some energy away from your oven and be very inefficient in your cooking. And one of those is baking stones. I remember back in the 90s, the hot thing was not just baking stones, but actually instead of buying a baking stone, you could go to the homeware store and buy tiles that you could put into the bottom of your oven to like replicate a brick oven or a stone oven for really authentic bread baking or pizza baking at home. And I remember them saying, you can leave these tiles in 24/7. Same with your baking stone. Whoever was selling baking stones would tell you, oh, you can put this in the bottom rack of your oven and just leave it there. Just leave it there all the time. Well, I did. And so this was the first of me having a reminder of heat science as an adult, outside of 5th grade science class. I kind of had an oh dumb moment. So here's what happens. I throw a baking stone into the bottom rack of my electric oven. And listen, I got to do a little confession of a chef here too in this episode. So here's what happens. I go to preheat my oven to 425 degrees because what I'm going to cook, we all have our moments. So let's just give me a little grace here. And also, by the way, this was 25 years ago. But I'm going to cook a frozen pot pie. So it's after work, we're back in the law firm days, and I come home and I pull a couple frozen pot pies out, put them on a cookie sheet. I crank the oven to 425. I wrap the edges of the pot pies with foil, because, and I cut a little star in each one, and I set them on a baking sheet. The preheat light comes on. My oven is 425 degrees. I put the pot pies in, and I had to go walk the dog and check the mail and do some things and wait the 45 minutes for this pot pie to be done. When I come back, I open up the oven, 45 minutes have gone by, and I can tell that the crust is not as brown as it should be. And when I go to check it with a knife, the way I check a pot pie, I stick a knife in and then pull it out, and if the blade is hot, then the pot pie is heated all the way through. I went to go stick a knife in, it was crunchy. 45 minutes later, at 425, it wasn't even thoroughly thawed yet, much less cooked. Okay. What's happening here? So I started a little deep dive myself. Sorry, I banged into that table. A little deep dive myself at that moment into the science of heat and what was going on. And what was actually happening were two important pieces of information for me about my oven. One goes back to the science of heat that we just talked about in our last podcast, which is that pizza stone that I had in the bottom of the oven was cold, right? Or room temperature. So let's say it was 70 degrees. I turned my oven on 425. My coil is at the bottom of the oven. Heat rises, but heat also focuses on making everything around it its same temperature. That's part of its thermal focus, right? So as the heat lifts up, it hits that cold stone. The stone is just a massive absorber of slow heat. It really stuns the energy of that heat transference, slows it right down, and so the stone itself starts absorbing all of the thermal energy coming up from that heat, and it's not getting through because the stone is not a heat conductor. It is a very poor conductor of heat, meaning it takes an incredibly long time to heat up, and as long as it takes to heat up is how long it takes for that heat to transfer through it. Slow conductor of heat. So it absorbed all that 425 degree heat, probably took it 30 to 40 minutes to heat up. Then it started to transfer heat upwards through the rest of the oven. Meanwhile, my pot pies were sitting on a higher rack, just sitting there frozen, okay? That was an important lesson for me. I got the stone out of the oven. Yes, I could conceivably leave it there 24/7, but as far as efficiency, what a waste of time. If I don't need to preheat that stone for an hour so I can make an amazing pizza, I don't want that in the oven. So that was lesson number one. Lesson number two was in the functioning of an electric range. It became clear to me that what I was working with on the top of this range was a computer program, not a temperature gauge. Here's what I mean by that. Because my preheat light went on, right? 8 minutes into the preheat, it said this oven is 425 degrees. Where did it get that information? I have two answers to that. I think that it might have had a thermometer reader that was too close to the heating element. And once that bottom element hit that 450, then it says, there we go. That's the 425. That's what we're looking for. Red light comes on. That's one possibility. The other possibility is it's simply a microchip program. When you turn this switch and turn this dial, in 8 minutes, this light comes on. There's no thermostat. There's nothing reading temperature. It's simply just a matter of flip, switch, and light, right? So you can check your own oven's owner's manual about preheat settings and what those mean, and if it's really taking a temperature, and what is it taking the temperature up? Is the temperature reading for a preheat somehow a probe that's taking the ambient temperature in the center of the oven, or is it taking the temperature up by the coil? If your coil is up here and is 350 degrees, the bottom of this oven is not yet 350 degrees. And reverse that. If the coil's down here and 350 degrees, the top of your oven is warmer, but it's not 350 yet necessarily. So where is that probe? If it's right by the heat element, that's not very accurate information. And a well preheated oven can make a world of difference to the results of what comes out of that oven. Golden, crispy, browning, Maillard reactions, the things that we're looking for. When we put something into an oven that's not ready for it, that can be very damaging to the final results of our recipe. So that is why I go back to the thermometer concept. Hang a $5 thermometer in your oven, set it on 350, watch that light pop on, and then read the thermometer for yourself. If it's off kilter, I don't think that you need to replace your oven or necessarily even have it calibrated. You might need to, but maybe not. What you need to know is, this is how long it takes for me to preheat this oven. Forget the light. I know that I need 12 minutes or 17 minutes or whatever it is, okay? The other thing that I do want to mention very briefly in this, and we'll wrap it up, but that is altitude. And I do not know a lot about high altitude cooking, in part because I live below sea level. So technically, where I live in Florida, we live below sea level. Altitude is not an issue here. But you know what's funny is that a couple of cooking almost fails happened to me when I was traveling in the last 2 years. So one time I was out, we have family that moved to Denver, and I was going to make a pizza for the grill. Like, I can make a pizza dough in my sleep. This is a no-brainer for me. That's as close to me having to just throw in the towel and say, I guess I don't know how to cook after all. Let's go to the grocery store and buy a pizza crust, because that dough almost didn't make it. I got it there eventually. But I was so clueless. I had no idea that altitude could be having an impact on the way that dough was rising, etc. And it had a huge impact. It was almost a fail. The next time I had an issue, I was up in the Carolinas teaching some classes. And one of the classes is we were making jams. And we were at this beautiful part of North Carolina. And I've got this poor gal over there stirring up this pot of strawberry jam. I mean, she had to stir that thing for an hour and 10 minutes. It went on and on and on before it would thicken up. It did finally get there. So, and then the next day we did a bread baking class. I think we might have done scones the next day, and one of those never set. We never could get that to work out. Most of them did okay, but one just didn't take. And then we did a bread class, and it was fine, but it was different. Do you know what I mean? It just felt the results were a little odd. And I also remember being kind of frustrated with the oven that was there. Even though it was brand new, it was a household oven, and it just was not generating heat. Like, I had preheated it for a certain temperature, and then when I put stuff in there, I could just tell this is just not generating the heat that it says that it is. This is not the same 450 that I work on at home. So I was going to have to teach a few more classes up in the Carolinas over the course of the next 18 months. And so when I got home from that trip, I started doing some research. And do you know that altitude will affect the transference of heat for every 1,000 feet of altitude that you go up from sea level? Every 1,000 feet. So I looked up where we were, and I think we were right at 5,000. Where we were in that particular cabin. It was actually surprisingly elevated there. So for every 1,000 feet, my heat transference changes subtly. By 5,000 feet, I'm seeing a difference. The jam that should have taken 35 minutes took an hour and 10 minutes. So for those of you that are living above 4,000 feet or higher above sea level, I would absolutely recommend that you do a little bit of research on medium altitude to high altitude. Certainly, if you've moved from the East Coast to Denver, it is time for a high altitude cooking class out there. What happens is the thin air, this is, me and my junk science, but basically the thin air causes heat to look like it's doing things that it's not doing. Remember boiling water in a paper cup in science class, right? And that's where we changed the oxygen so that there was a much thinner air and it looked like it was boiling, but the actual temperature of it was far below a technical boil. So that is the next thing I will suggest, is that if you live at least 4,000 feet above sea level, or your house is there, you might need to both preheat your oven for twice as long as you ever have before, and you might need to up your cooking temperatures by about 50 degrees. How about that? Things you've always done pretty well at 375 to 400 might really do a lot better at 425 to 450 with a solid 20-minute preheat. So that is something to consider as well. Altitude. I am so susceptible to altitude because of where I live. Again, I live in Florida. We technically are in the tropics. We are technically below sea level. And so my ears will pop when I walk up like a third flight of stairs. That's how little it takes for me. So get to know your oven a little bit better. If you've never done it, crank out the owner's manual, flip through it, see if it's got a little information for you about preheats and about settings and what its ambient temperature tends to be. And so in this line of thinking, now we know about thermal energy. We've talked about that. Now we've talked about our own ovens and just kind of how they're functioning and some things to think about there. Next up, we're going to talk about convection. And with these two podcasts behind you, I think the convection concept becomes a little clearer. I hope so. I do love convection. All right, that's what we're going to talk about next. Q&A with Chef A. I'm so glad that you guys are here. Join us on Gumroad if you'd like to get recipes to go with these podcasts. You can subscribe over there. If you are new to our YouTube channel, welcome. I hope you'll find some other great content here for you. And I look forward to chatting convection and then air fryers. All right, look for both of those. Have a great day. I hope you cook something delicious.